Got it.
So, thanks for taking the time, and good to see you again. It's good to talk again.
I like the necklace. Is that new?
Relatively, yeah, thanks. Relatively, like this year new. So yeah, and it's one of like it's a weird one. Like I don't know, like I've never worn a cross, and like it kind of like has changed the ritual element of my daily life in a kind of way. Like I don't know.
Have you had any people approach you about it? Like,
not really. I guess, yeah, I don't know. I've done a lot of thinking about Christianity and symbolism and stuff, and so like it carries a lot of meaning personally, and
there's almost
it's like a reminder kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I mean I think like Paul talks about bearing your cross and even kind of wearing it as, I mean, because in the beginning Christianity is this really sort of revolutionary thing where it's like you're very much an anti whatever's going on in the general public thing. If you're going to be a Christian, I mean, that's sort of almost like an insulting. I think originally even isn't Christian the word coined as sort of an insult for the people who are kind of followers of the way.
Okay.
And I'm not 100% certain about that, but I think that was the case. It was like then to embrace that as a sort of like humbling death. And so like any Christian symbolism that you might wear is like it's sort of committing public suicide, which is very consistent even with the cross, right? The cross is taking on your own death, being willing to bear and make peace with death and become one with Christ in that.
Mm-hmm.
Which culturally right now is sort of, I don't want to take on because evangelicals have to have this thing, and I don't even want to shit on evangelicals, but there's this thing of kind of really viewing yourself as a persecuted thing, and I don't think that's what taking on the cross is doing. I think choosing to bear the cross, again, obviously contextually can mean different things, but I think part of it is like being willing to, I guess, be misrepresented, being willing to be misunderstood, just this total humility of just like, I'm just laying down any sense of wanting to be viewed a certain way or whatever. It's just like, it's there has to be a sort of suicide associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really interesting. I mean, it certainly feels, in my experience, kind of countercultural, like, at least in England, like in the UK, and in relationship to like just me, like my life growing up and just like the public culture, like wearing a cross and saying I'm Christian and the whole thing associated with that feels like very like against the cultural tide kind of thing.
There's so much baggage always associated. I mean, there's so much baggage just associated with taking on an identity at all.
Right.
It seems like there's something like a willingness to be misunderstood implicit in taking on a.
Really well put, because I think like there's a thing of like not taking on an identity, like being. I think there's stuff in the New Testament about like being on the fence kind of thing, or like kind of like not assuming an identity, but like not taking on a very specific identity is, of course, is like really good for modern sensibilities, because like, oh, like I can accept every worldview and every I'm not this or that, like it doesn't matter to me because I'm kind of nowhere, so like it doesn't matter to me, and that yeah, go on. Oh, by the way, Garrett, I'm gonna mute my mic while you talk, just because of background noise.
Okay, no worries. I'm not hearing any background noise, so I don't know if you need to worry about it or not, but But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's two sides of it. Because on one side, you get to sort of be open to everybody and nobody feels threatened by you. But then on the other side of it, you don't get to be, you ward off all personal judgment. It's like, hey, you don't get to define me. I'm not defining myself. If you try and call me any title, it doesn't count because I'm nothing. You don't get to define me, which is very, very in line with this modern, which I mean, on what's I think even that is true. Like to some extent, every human, like you can't define every human, right? And like I don't even understand myself fully. I definitely don't, right? But you have to sort of be willing to do that. There's a humility in that, with being willing to be called a name. I guess it's a really complex problem. But yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Just the problem of identity, of being willing to be something, having the courage to be something, even though it's sort of going to be an imperfect being. I feel like my thoughts can kind of just ramble on there and get lost a little bit, but I'm not sure. What did you want to talk about today?
I mean, diving into the cross is interesting, like totally interesting. I don't really have an agenda. I just kind of want to talk to people and let the kind of spirit of the conversation come up as best it does naturally. But like,
you've got to have the courage to choose what this conversation's about, Sam. That's the same. Yeah, no, it's the same problem.
Well, like I guess I've called the series Philosophia, of like right. I'm having talk to people about religion. I guess the general project is to have the talks in a kind of spirit. Thing is akin to what you're doing with this could be interesting. I think like the spirit in which the talk's happening, where both parties are kind of oriented to something like wisdom and trying to struggle towards that and circumambulate that, contra kind of philonikeia, like a kind of combative or trying to win, or trying to even like establish a kind of intellectual superiority or things like that. It's just I feel like I just don't feel like that spirit of discourse is particularly productive, and so I guess that's the essence of the kind of idea behind it, but also like to try and well, since you asked, I mean, I've just started a PhD at Bristol in like last month, and so like my focus has been like reading, writing, working on the thesis, and I'm seeing this as a kind of complementary project of like engaging as many people as I can about religion and their relationship to it and that whole thing. So I guess it would be cool to get a bit more into your story with regards to religion and those kind of things. But we just started off with the cross, and like that was a really cool theme. Like, so yeah.
But even, I mean, I have so many thoughts lately because as soon as I saw you made the name of the project Philosophia, I was like, oh, that's so great. You got a way better name than I mean, I'm happy to commit to holding. I mean, this could be interesting. It's fun because there's a sort of a playful attitude to it, which is really important to me to have a sort of sense of humor when coming to conversation, where it's like, I don't know, is this going to be interesting? It could just be kind of dumb. But the I mean, did you get that from Vervaeke? The contrast between Philosophia and Philonikeia?
Yeah, I got that from Vervaeke. But it's also like, I mean, I've been interested in philosophy my whole life, and like I guess I've always been aware of the difference between like the general sense of philosophy that people have as like this, oh, you're being philosophical now, or like, I'm not interested in philosophy, or I don't know enough about philosophy. And I just think that's just kind of the wrong way. I always have thought that's the kind of wrong way of even seeing it, because like Socrates is there in Athens, struggling with people in his polis and challenging them and questioning them.
And there's this tone of like, okay, being philosophical means being very high and intellectual and technical and like using very, like being very verbose. And I don't know, one of the things I admire the most, or at least I think what really engages the sort of the spirit of philosophy in a way that the sort of academic philosophy doesn't, is learning how to try to have a conversation in the context of just like people who don't claim to be philosophers. So I think that's where the real philosophy happens, or even trying to talk to just kids. Like I teach kids music all the time, and I love kids. I really love. There's a crazy. Yeah, being a kid is just awesome. Like you don't. There's not a sense of judgment or a sense of self-awareness. It's just this. It's naive. It's maybe naive. I don't even know if it's naive. It's this childish wisdom though of the insight of the world that you have, where it's not sort of culturally molded yet. It's just kind of really very what's a very almost phenomenological experience of the world. It's so much just like, it's like they haven't learned how to just culturally speak the language. It's just about, this is what I really see, what the world seems to be to me, because I mean that's your experience as a kid, right?
I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, and yeah, I mean, like, I feel like everyone's living out a philosophy, I think. like that's what I feel. And I think some philosophers probably said that. But like, I do really think that. Like, and however ignorant of philosophy one is, like, one is still committed to certain philosophical positions and passionately lives them out or defends them or argues against other ones, and they really care. And I would say people are all yearning for wisdom and suffer greatly when they don't have wisdom. And part of the whole process of learning from our experience is like, oh, how was that a misguided thing I did? How was I lacking in virtue there? Or how could I have done something different there? And that whole reflective process, if one undergoes it, is a philosophical one. And I think we do. I think kind of like life forces us to wrestle with that. We can procrastinate it, but like at some point, your philosophy is going to be, like if you're living a hedonistic lifestyle, for example, hedonism is a whole philosophical posture, and certain truths will be revealed at some point through that. And
exactly.
you either seek the wisdom to extract that and change or not. But even the hedonist is living a philosophy.
Exactly. There's no life that can't be sort of engaged with from a philosophical perspective. I think that's part of a mistake people can make when they think of philosophy as just this academic thing. It's almost funny because, sorry, I know I keep interrupting you, but this is such I've been looking forward to chatting with you, man. This is the kind of stuff I love chatting about.
Honestly, go wherever you want. Like, feel free. I know we want to have you. We're talking about the structure, but honestly, go wherever you want, because I think like there's loads of fascinating stuff here.
But so with the Philosophia versus Philosophia thing, it's almost as if the institutional version, like what people generally think of when they think about philosophy, because our world is so, it's not even that our world is so academic, but any of these disciplines, these practices seem so like these distant academic things that only sort of nerds get into. Whereas like the common person, I don't do philosophy, right? But it's obviously not true, or I hope it can become obviously not true. But like the version of like academic philosophy where it's like arguing for certain positions feels a lot more like that zero-sum game implied in the Philosophia, right? Which is, it's fundamentally about winning and beating the other position. And zero-sum game is a concept that came up I recently, when I was thinking about this too, and it's just like, yeah, the assumption is that it's like it's branching off of two fundamentally, and I think it might be the two fundamental ways of viewing the world, is that of sort of a both and or an either or, right? The either or is the Philosophia, which is that the only way to move forward is to dismiss one thing and choose the other, right? And that choice is sort of final, and it's like, actually, okay, I'm choosing this, and the other is discarded, right? That's zero-sum game, meaning that at the end of the game, it's not like both teams win something. It's one team wins something. There's not a net gain to the system. It's that some of the value in the system is transferred from one of the people who now has 0, and the other person now has 2, right? Like it's death and life. But it's funny though, because that's not the way we play games. That's not the way we play. We play sports. We don't put football teams against each other, and then whoever loses, we kill them. Right? Although it'd be interesting to maybe talk about
unless
you
the Aztecs, yeah,
or the Aztecs. I'd be interested actually to hear a little bit about that, but maybe riff on that for a second, because I want to. It seems like they're actually, both of those ways of viewing the world actually are necessary, and they're you can't actually live life just under the viewpoint of like, you can't compare and contrast. Like, see, even to compare and contrast Philosophia and Phenomenology, and then dismiss Phenomenology is a very anti-Philosophia thing to do, right?
Wait, say that again.
So to compare philosophy and the love of victory, this sports, the zero-sum game, and to say, actually, we're not going to do zero-sum game, we're just going to do philosophy. That's actually implicitly to be doing what the Philosophia thing is, right? That's comparing the two and saying one wins and then dismissing the other. But to be internally consistent with this Philosophia, this integration thing, we actually have to integrate the view that is no integration. Somehow you have to be able to say yes and to this view of no and.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a very fair point, and I mean, like, the way I square that is that they're both forms of love, and so it's like, do I want to say it's wrong to love victory? Like, no. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a form of love, and like, if you take, there's a certain level at which, of course, there's something very admirable about it. If you look at someone, there's a really good book. I can't remember the author now, but he was the trainer of Michael Jordan. I think he's like an elite performance coach, babe.
Interesting.
And he wrote a book called Relentless, which was all about like sports psychology and like the inner workings of like high level sports performance. And there's something very admirable about that, and which kind of pushes us towards the peaks of human potential and such things like this. Like Cristiano Ronaldo in football loves victory. He's just joined Manchester United in the Premier League in England, and you can just, like, the whole thing about him entering the club is just how much he loves victory, and actually how much he's raising the standards of every player and fan and expectations there by that, So like, but for me, Lionel Messi is the best in the world, and he always directs his prayers up to God, and so
interesting, yeah.
But anyway, but I just want to. What was my point? Is like that, like, caring for something and loving something and being passionate about it and diverting your energies towards it, and victory is, within the context of a game, what you should be aiming for. Within the rationality of a game is like the point. Right. I've had conversations with my friend about this, actually, and we were playing Magic the Gathering. It's a card game, and he's played it for some years, and he talks to me often about how he doesn't really care about winning, but more about kind of using the potentials of the deck creatively and having fun, but also facilitating other players. Like, there's lots of elements to the way he sees the game. but my position was always, but like, yeah, but like, of course you have to care about winning. Otherwise, you know, what, like,
yeah, like what's the point of because the point of the game is to sort of measure against each other different strategies, and then actually see what's the best, have a hierarchical, like something emerges on top and it's like, that's the winner, and we're going to sort of glorify that. And that glorification doesn't happen without at least a sort of dismissal of everybody else participating. They have to be pushed down below.
I guess the way I'd reconcile it is like there's definitely a place for that perspective. It's just that it's not the highest perspective, and actually the love of one thing can kind of preclude or obscure the love of something higher. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, actually our attachments, our desires can kind of blind us to what is the ultimate thing.
But that's the danger in thingness at all. That's the danger in believing in something or being something, right? To be something is to dismiss everything else and be that. And yes, in that decision, you are choosing to live or be or elevate something that is imperfect, but you either do that or you don't do anything at all. So the only way to engage with, because obviously, yeah, the thing beyond it is God, which I love the way John Vervaeke talks about God being a being of non-being, right? Or like God himself is not, he doesn't exist. It's like he's beyond existence. That's been a really, I don't know how orthodox that idea is. I think it probably is a lot more in line with Christian mysticism than mainline dogmatic Christianity. But it seems that it's a
transcendence would be the word, right? Just to go beyond. And like, so that's basically the essence of my point about the follow Nicaea thing, is like Cristiano Ronaldo kind of like should love victory, and actually every player of football should have a love for victory. Because if you don't, really you shouldn't be playing. You should not be playing. You should not be playing, and you're doing a disservice to seriously, you're doing a disservice to the fans if you don't care about winning. Get off the football pitch. What were we talking about? Transcendence. But I think there's a way in which that has to be transcended, and this is part of the narrative. Since we're on football, there is a kind of ethic of.
I just realized we're not talking about the same sport.
Oh, of course.
That's fine though. They're both great sports.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt there. You had a good thought going.
Yeah, no, it's just that. Okay, it's just that victory in this game now, in this time and in this place, on this date, matters. But there is something that matters infinitely more greatly than that. And Jordan Peterson would make an argument like something like the next game matters, or the series of games matters, or the league matters, or the league of leagues matters, or the career matters. And then outside of football, family matters, nature matters, like many other things matter than this.
And very outside of being, non-being matters. That's the final step you take in that meditation of, okay, beyond the game, there's the non-gamers, there's the iterative game, there's the iterative game that isn't closed off. It isn't actually a thing yet. It's beyond thingness. So it's like this game is the game you're playing. It's a real game. It has a start and an end. But the iterative game is a game that doesn't end, and it's not actually. It's an infinite thing. It's not actually finite enough to be. It's beyond being. Yeah,
sure. I don't know if I would follow you with non-being, but maybe we get tied up in that.
I don't know if I've been thinking about that, because it is sort of a problematic way of describing God.
But like, I think what I hear is like there's an apophatic tradition in Christian theology, which would be like the negative, and that's kind of what I'm hearing in what you're saying. Like, totally, like this negative principle, which I need to.
The problem, though, is that you can either think about God as being this. I think it's the difference between a code and a symbol. A code is something that, if you learn the secret, you can decode it and find the real message. And it's a simple thing, and it's finite, and it's logical, and it's coherent, and it's cohesive, right? If you solve the riddle, it's actually solved, and now you have the true message, right? But a symbol doesn't refer to a specific finite message or set. It's a bringing together of everything, right? Symbol means to bring together, right? And so when you're symbolically pointing to something, you're not pointing, you can't decode a symbol because it's not a code, right? And so to the extent that existence is symbolic, or like man is created in the image of God, or creation is created in the image of God, even, as I would think about it that way. Although, again, maybe Orthodox Christians might dismiss that statement. But I really do think about it that way. And then it's like, okay, so it refers to, like, something that's infinite can't be in the same way that a finite thing can be.
Sure.
Or just it's a different. It's like the implication of saying, okay, God doesn't exist is that you think about God not being. But even that is like not really a category. There's nothing. You can't even talk about nothing. Nothing isn't a thing. It's nothing. but like,
no, I agree with what you're saying, and I think. If I stick with association football for a moment longer with like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, like in European football, these are like two of maybe the best players ever, and there's like a hot debate, okay, about like who is the best out of them, okay, and like it's an interesting one for me because like Ronaldo is like kind of like embodying the spirit of Philosophia. Loves victory, is an incredible football talent, okay, and arguably one of the best ever. But there's a kind of pride or ego to him, and Lionel Messi celebrates by going like that, and celebrates by going like that. And I think maybe we could just like pause on that symbol because I think that kind of gets at some of the difference we're talking about, and I think. Messi is just, I think, and there's a very interesting thing because it's very interesting talking it out loud because I think it's because of that there's a kind of just like there's a kind of deep resonance and profundity to Messi's story and the there's a kind of I just feel like he's embodying a higher mode of being than Ronaldo, let's say, and it's something like pride and humility. It's something like pride and humility is like, but at the level of talent, they're both obviously some of the best ever to play.
And it almost feels like there's an implication there just by the natural symbolism of the way the world lays itself out, as Jonathan Peugeot would say, that it's almost just as necessary to have the proud figure as the humble one. It's like they're the two sides at the top of the same coin. One sort of reveling in being. You had the guy who's more obsessed with himself and like his own ability. It's like, I actually really am being this victorious, incredible athlete. And the other one who's kind of his vision is beyond himself. And I
think it. I don't know if I don't know. I don't know because I think there's something wrong about pride. Like I think it is.
I think so too.
I think it is like the wrong posture. At the end of the day, it is the wrong posture, and so this transcendence theme is like that. There is a call. You might need to journey through pride. That might be a necessary. So I hear what you're saying in that respect. You might need to first love victory to learn that it is ultimately hollow and that something greater needs to be loved, but I don't want to.
It's almost like you need to believe in the fiction that you really could be the best enough to really pursue it. Or I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Like there's a hubris to being the best, and to like, I mean, you listen to Kanye West talk about his career and himself, and he's got the biggest ego I've ever seen. But he's incredible. He's doing really revolutionary things, and I don't know. It's weird. It's almost like
the ego needs to develop. Is kind of what I hear you saying there. Like ego, because that would be a Jungian point as well. Like Jung thought like actually like half of our life builds up the ego, and then the other half of our life lets go.
Right. Okay.
But what I hear you saying is that it's important. Like ego development is important. Like the idea that I am able to be great at football, for example.
I wonder if it's even like you can only have that really, really deep divine experience of humility when you're humbled from a very high place. Like I wonder if you have to really become something in order to feel it when God judges you and says you're not good enough. Because else you're not really losing anything.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I do see what you're saying. Well, it's kind of like pride comes before the fall, right? But then maybe but like kind of we need to fall to like repent. So like it's like I don't know. I
think there is actually. I'm trying to think of one of the. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I mean, if you look at the story, I mean, actually, this is really, really consistent throughout Scripture. Is that, but one of the sort of microcosms of it is the prodigal son, right? Mm-hmm. His entire story is one of hubris. Of I'm the best. I have all this wealth. I'm going to go and I'm going to be the top. I'm going to go and gamble it away, and I'm going to use my wealth to build up this incredible ego of meanness and just impose myself on the world. Mm-hmm. And then, sort of the judgment of God is your money runs out, and now you're going to be eating with like the lowest of the low. You're going to be eating with the pigs, and then you're going to come back and you're going to beg for the grace of God. You're going to and you're going to experience this elated moment of the father in the story running to you and saying, I accept you. Right. That's the story, I think, also of like the rejection of Ishmael and then his line, because, or I mean, all of these rejected brothers, right? All throughout the patriarchy of like, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, there's always a chosen blessed brother and a neglected, usually older brother, even in the case with Cain, actually. So all the way back to the very, very beginning. There's a blessed brother and there's a cursed brother set off to wander. Even Adam is, in a certain sense, this cursed man, cursed to wander, right? And Christ, when he comes, he doesn't come and just glorify the Jewish. He doesn't just save Israel. He saves the whole world. The Gentiles are brought in, and this. So the Gentiles, in a certain sense, are sort of symbolic of the wanderer. Right? That whole identity comes and is brought back in. And even Jesus himself, like the prophecy about the Messiah comes to fruition in Jesus, who is not actually born blood of the prophetic line of David, who that's, the Lion of Judah, the one who's supposed to come and save everybody is supposed to be in the bloodline of David. He's not. Joseph is the one who's in that line. I think it says that in, I forget which
the
one.
First gospel, isn't it?
Is it
if I remember
Matthew,
correctly.
maybe? Yeah.
The first, yeah.
Okay.
Goes into genealogy, if I remember. Yeah.
But it's like that. So like, Mary is just like, I think she's at least, she's not as consistent with the prophecy as Joseph, anyways. And obviously Joseph doesn't contribute anything to the birthing of Christ. He's still part of it, but it's almost like this is just something I was thinking about this morning, but ultimately, even the salvation of the world, it comes about and brings all of those sort of rejected wanderers back into the fold. And even maybe sort of, I'm trying to think about whether or not Mary kind of falls into that. That might be a stretch. I'm not sure, but at least it's like she's the one who carries Christ, right? And I don't think I think it's Joseph is the one that's actually in the line of Judah, and Mary is just sort of a rando. But to bring all that together, anyways, if I can, how did I get here?
We were talking about pride and humility, and like sports.
Yes, okay, and the prodigal son. So I was saying it seems like this story of the proud one, which again, that's Cain, that's Esau, that's Ishmael, that's all of these people who are cast off. They are the ones, I mean, even you look at Jesus meeting this woman at the well, and it's like when she experiences the acceptance of Christ, she experiences it in a deeper way than obviously the Jews. The Pharisees don't even accept the gospel. They don't even accept Christ initially.
Oh, I completely see the point you're making, and the thing is, right, and there's a whole this is a deeply biblical point, because the idea is that Christ or God or both care about the repentant spirit and the turning of someone who's in sin back home, basically, or back to God, right? And there is an emphasis in the New Testament, from my understanding of it, on this notion that they care. I don't know if I want to say more. It's a hard one. It's almost like the best way I want to say it is like the two hands, or like the left and the right,
Yeah,
the opposites. But like there is at least a stress and an emphasis upon those that are out in the edges and in the wilderness, and their heart repenting, because those who are righteous are, because it's all about wholeness, right? Like why, like if you call if you go into a hospital and you're fully healthy, they should pay you no regard.
Exactly.
Right? And the church is the hospital of the soul. It has one way of seeing it is that there's the church is healing and restoring our hearts to wholeness, because for those that have been oriented in like the opposite direction, the wrong direction. So a quick comment on this is that this is something I've talked a lot about on the Symbolic World Discord with like a few different people. I'm sure you've been involved in the combos as well, but like this idea of like the right hand path and the left hand path, and the right hand path would represent something like righteousness or humility. So we could say something like messy, I mentioned earlier, and then the left hand path is basically like the wayward path, and I think it might have something to do with the narrow gate and the wide gate. But themes on the left hand path include conversation around psychedelics, generally sin, and generally the way in which we go wayward in our...
And culturally, the left hand is the one used to wipe.
To wipe, that's interesting. Yeah,
like that's why you don't shake hands with your left hand, because you don't want to be rubbing your feces on your friends.
Oh, okay.
Like I think in a lot of, I don't know how many cultures, but at least know in some, like, I mean, nobody's mass producing toilet paper until very recently. So you got to wipe with one hand. Which hand's it going to be? Well, the secondary one, the wandering, I mean, this is my good hand, so this is my crap hand.
Right. Well, I mean, my point is that there's a kind of center and an edge, an orthodoxy and an unorthodoxy, a straight way and a wide way, and that what I heard you emphasizing just there was kind of like the wide way. And actually, in the Bible, I think there is a lot of emphasis on the wide way, and that and the strange mystery of how we're kind of saved in the very edges and extremities of our sin, not for a moment to say that sin is good. So like with the psychedelics thing, I've had extensive conversations with people because I've had a profound psychedelic experience in my life. I found it spiritually formative, and it was absolutely crucial to my current faith and to where I'm at spiritually now. Okay. And so I've talked to Christians who are just like, no, psychedelics are sin, like the end, right? And so like and so that's kind of a right hand thing, because I kind of think that's actually true. Like I think if hamartia is like aiming in the wrong direction,
missing the mark,
then I feel happy to say that psychedelics is a kind of hamartia, like a missing the mark spiritually. Yet there is this strange left-handedness to the way in which Christ can even like enter into, like use the demonic against itself is kind of the idea we were intuiting, like flip it, like, because if there are demonic principles associated with psychedelics, there is a way in which that can become flipped. Or like the point you were making earlier, maybe like Ronaldo, or that spirit of pride we were discussing anyway, or the Philonikeia, maybe at some point, perhaps there is like always open the possibility of the repentance and using that sin as to redeem. And it's a strange mystery.
It's a very strange,
because we want to say it's sin still. Like the right hand wants to say like, right, no, like this is sin.
And but so it is sort of actually necessary, though.
In a strange way, it seems. It's like for me, like I can only speak from my experience. Like for me, I've taken a very left-handed path. I am actually left-handed as well. But I've taken a very left-handed path in my life, and I feel. What do I want to say? I feel deeply repentant and kind of ashamed at times, like deeply kind of like, I guess there are ways in which my conscience has been violated that like kind of lingers in my soul. And so from the right hand side, like there's a very deep sense in which I feel how I have transgressed, or I have lived in a wrong way, and I think that's like a half truth, and a truth, but like a half truth. And then like on the other side, it was just completely, how could it have been another way? And actually, in the edges of my sin, there was this strange moment of the flip and the repentance and a profound reorientation.
I don't think, I mean, you talked about even the sort of almost feeling a sense of shame sometimes. And I was thinking about this today because, I don't think you're really experiencing, I don't want to say you're not experiencing love at all, but I don't think the fullness of love meets you if you think you deserve it. That's not really a, that's sort of an economical transactional view of, I give you this, you give me that, and I get your love because I'm lovable. I don't think you feel like I see. Today I just had an experience with a friend, and I felt so, it wasn't even that, I felt accepted, and I wanted to weep on the way home just because I felt like if you, like the sense of feeling love and feeling like you genuinely don't deserve it, and then feeling like it's given to you anyways, is just this explosive feeling where it's it feels totally different than feeling like feeling loved because you think you deserve it, because, you know, like, okay, you ought to love me. But just when you don't feel like somebody owes it to you at all, and then you still feel accepted, you still feel loved. That's what I think so many of these stories get at. I think that's part of the prodigal son too. It's like he really does not. He wants to beg. With the prodigal son story, he wants to go and beg and be one of the servants. It's like
that's beautiful, Garrett. So so these stories are helping us see what agape is, you know.
Because that's the way. You know, there's probably so much to the concept, but that's an angle on agape that recently, going through John's work, has exposed to me, that agape is this love that transforms something that really isn't human into humanity. It's transformative love.
Is also that exact thing you just described. I've heard Malcolm Guite talk about it, who's like an Anglican priest and poet, really interesting person, and he's talked about love in John's Gospel. In basically the way you're saying it there, like the agape is this sense that we are loved unconditionally, like beyond condition, and out of an abundance and an infinity of love, and a plenitude of love, and that this is the first thing, and this is the Christian emphasis. This is the first thing, not my love or human love or eros, or these are not the first things. The first thing is the reality of the abundant outpouring of agape, and receiving that, and being a vessel for that first and foremost, right? And that is that receiving, that passiveness, that undeservingness, and the real abundance of the love. I think those all get at the sense of agape, at least a sense of agape that I think is helpful.
If you kind of even go into you talk about overflowing, if you kind of envision this scenario of a cup, that, you know, it's like, if your sense of yourself is I'm about 20 gallons deep, I could be filled up that much, and I kind of deserve to be filled up that much. But if you view yourself as this sort of surface, is like you're deserving of nothing, then the second you're touched by even the smallest amount of grace, it's overflowing, because you can't hold any of it. It's like, I don't deserve any of this. So it's like the lower you see yourself, the lower the lower you can get, and the less you feel like you deserve any love.
Well, the lower you can get, the fuller you can get.
Yeah, and it's like it's as soon as you just even receive a sort of just a drop of acceptance from, it's like it's overflowing, it's overwhelming.
Because depth is connected to, just riffing on the symbolism here, but it's really interesting. Yeah. But like humility is lowness, isn't it? It's like right. Low, and so depth is connected to like the fullness, like the depth of the chalice is like the fullness of what is like space for the fullness of what can be received, kind of thing. And I think just that relationship to agape, receiving, being a vessel, and then second, giving, and eros, and you being an image or an echo of that same love you have received, and being unto others in that image and in that likeness, and being kind of glorified by that, you know. Like, I think that is a really interesting way of thinking about love, and specific agape love, like the idea that we're filled by God to then give.
Well, but you're only experiencing the overflowing nature of love when you're overflowing, when you're getting more than you feel that you deserve. So I think you said that you want to have this depth of, you want to be like a vessel that's deep, but obviously, I mean, this concept of, like, we're talking about the love of God, the agape love of God, is something that's supposed to be, even the definition of it, I think if you look it up, is probably something like infinite love. It's love that doesn't end. So in order to be filled with that, the only way to experience it is to experience the overflowing, right? And unless you're having that, so as soon as you are accepting love that you feel you deserve, you're not being put in touch with the overflowing nature of agape type love, right? So in order to be filled up with it, you have to be an infinite glass, right? You can't be, or
I don't know if you need to be an infinite glass, but I think I liked what you said about overflow, because overflow is the way a limit is transcended.
Yeah.
Because to overflow, I have to be a limited cup, so to speak. But no, I do. I need to be a particular, specific, finite thing, you know. But I like what you're saying about overflow, because overflow is the way in which what I hold
it extends beyond me.
Right?
Yeah. Like to be filled with something that's beyond you. The only way to experience that is to have a sensation of overflowing.
Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting, because maybe, like, the reason pride is considered the chief of the sins is because of the way in which it blocks love, or like, because we are high and not low.
Pride is that infinite glass. Pride is that infinite glass. It's like nothing that I could get would be enough for me. It's like I'm the highest.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. It's I'm the highest. Yeah. I really like what you're saying about, like, the deserving thing, because I've never thought about that before. But that seems totally right, and that seems totally connected to love. Because maybe if I think I deserve it, then, well, firstly, that's really dangerous, because because like there's a pride and shame dynamic I've read in certain, like Jungian, like Jungian psychological schemes, like they emphasize who was it? I want to say, like, the psychologist Adler, I think it was, who coined the idea of the inferiority complex. But it was inferiority. Yeah, it was inferiority complex and superiority. Like, these two things are like these opposites, like this, which take you for a ride. And so, like, pride is the kind of identification with superiority, and that's fine as long as you're superior, because as soon as you're not, what then gets exposed is the inferiority complex, and it is maybe the most dangerous human psychological state. I'm deadly serious. Because,
absolutely,
to lose faith,
and it's almost a sort of pride somehow. It's so strange. Okay, so you asked me before we got started about Moby Dick. One of the things that's stuck with me about, I don't want to get sidetracked too much into this book, but just one little symbol is the Captain Ahab is this sort of Luciferian figure, which is all about the pride, and it's both of those things are right there with him. He's got the inferiority and the superiority, it's weird, because in a certain sense, his wound, he's had his leg chomped off by, he kind of blames it on God, essentially. He's just like, it's by the fates. It's the whale is kind of an extension of the powers of heaven. And so sorry, I'm going to get lost here. I don't want to get too far over there. But
it's fine. Yeah. Finish your thought. Yeah.
The inferiority is sort of a card to play. It's being a victim of, how does this connect? Because yes, so you go from the pride to extreme shame, and then the extreme shame becomes very important as a sort of an extension to the pride, where it's like your shame is a part of your argument against Yeah, it's a way of viewing that moment when you finally are sort of judged as it being sort of unfair, and then you're shamed, and it's like, I shouldn't be shamed like this. And
that's it, man. And I think something at the root of this is, Jordan Peterson has said it very well, like being the judge of being, or like implicitly assuming yourself to be the judge of being.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like, it's such a tough one, because there are legitimate human emotions and things going on there, and of course it does feel unfair when things happen to us in life, and kind of the question is, am I the final judge of whether this cosmos is fair or not, or is there a greater judge?
Right. Yeah, that's sort of the Cain story. That's all these things. Yeah, because I mean, and that's obviously the way Peterson unpacks the Cain and Abel story, is that, Cain his sacrifice is rejected by God, and he really feels like God ought to have accepted his sacrifice. And so his response, it's he deserved God's approval, and God didn't give it to him.
Deserved. Mm-hmm.
And then out of that, it's like this whole game is screwed. God be damned, and it's like, so he commits the worst. It's almost like he commits the worst sin he can think of, not even just out of jealousy for Abel, but out of a sort of a big fu to the system of like, this is what I think of your morality, your way of doing things, God. Like, you're just wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting, but this theme, and I really like that you've brought up the deserving thing. And like, I think of it psychologically, a way of thinking of it psychologically is that the way ego development goes is about this idea of deserving. Like, if you think about how our egos actually kind of develop from out of childhood into how they develop and mature, how our egos mature, isn't it through something like merit or deservedness, like the idea of like our parents' praise or the school's praise or sports that we won or whatever it is, the way, oh, like, well done, like that kind of mechanism is kind of how the ego is, like how the ego exists. And yet there is a deeper, sublime, mysterious truth is and that which we may have forgotten, really, and I think it kind of is a forgetting, is that we were once these babies, completely undeserved. There's this whole period of our development that is undeserving, powerless, impotent, egoless, like none of that. And that is an agapic formation fundamentally. And I think part of the process of the ego development, paradoxically enough, is actually forgetting that. It's actually because you need to learn that, because you kind of need to learn the opposite of that as well. Well, there's, in a strange way.
And it's sort of two sorts of acceptance, because, and I think you could even associate this both literally, like in everyone's life, but also sort of symbolically, of the love of the father and the love of the mother. Mm-hmm. Because that maternal love is really this just totally all accepting. I mean, you don't have to, you just think about the way your mom loves. I mean, maybe not everybody has a great relationship with their mom, but there's this sort of instinctual dynamic that develops in many, many cases where people know no matter what they do, their mom's going to love them and accept them. But the relationship with the father, I think, probably, and again, this is sort of a really, really wide net to cast.
I like the intuition. Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I mean, there's always going to be cases, there's going to be outliers, but I think in general, I think you can sort of symbolically talk about this.
It's also how men and women relate to each other
right.
socially.
Yes. So the maternal love is this, no matter what, it's sort of whatever you do, that is somehow included into the great plan, and it's a both and sort of love. Whereas the father's either you measure up or you don't.
Yep.
Right. And it really is this sort of this justice of either, this is the law, and can you live up to it? I mean, and that's, I mean, it's sort of symbolically associated with society. It's like, can you live up to society's expectations of you? Can you follow the law? And if you can't, then you're not accepted. And it's like, I think the part of the reason this is sort of archetypal, and everybody who talks about archetypes is usually going to stumble upon, or they're going to begin to discuss both paternal and maternal figures, is because it's one of the most two fundamental ways of looking at the world, experiencing the world, interacting with the world, judging the world. And it really is a both and, but it's an either or too, because they're not one person, right? It's okay. Ian McGilchrist said this
Well,
thing.
they are if they're married, aren't they?
Yeah, well, exactly. There's this very, very strange mystery to, because it's sort of fractal in that, okay, so the father's love or the father's viewpoint is sort of a either yes or no, either you live up or you don't. It's an either or kind of love. It's almost like a Philosophia kind of thing, right? And the mother's love is this, everything is included. I always love you, but you have both a mother and a father, and you need both a mother and a father to even exist. Right? You can't come to be without both a seed and an egg, right? And so it's this. There's a multiplicity and a oneness, because you're the oneness. You've come into existence because of both of them, but also there's the oneness of the marriage, right? Where it's like,
but there's also an ideal with the marriage, yeah. Which you might go on. Sorry.
No, go for it, man.
It's just you might like this book. You might already know it. But there's a book called The Either Or, written by Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish.
Oh man, okay, great.
And you'll love how it's structured too, because he writes often in pseudonyms. He's a really interesting philosopher, but he basically starts the book like kind of saying, like under a pseudonym, saying that he's discovered these like this bot. He basically bought a writing desk, and within the writing desk in the drawer are all of these scrolls and notes. And these scrolls and notes are the first series of texts are called A, and the second are B. And A is the aesthetic mode of life, that's the term he uses, the aesthetic mode. And the second B is the ethical, which is so it's kind of like an artist and a judge, and like
absolutely right.
And the whole book is structured that way.
And the spirit too, right?
Sorry,
aesthetic even has to do with the breath or the spirit, or it's like the thing that's sort of beyond form versus the form, right? But the judge is what shapes the.
Well, yeah, just to finish my point, like Kierkegaard's philosophical project is to quicken the soul of the reader towards the third possibility.
Okay.
Right? So the either or, so like you've been talking about this whole theme, which is why I think you find it interesting, but it's this kind of like stretching out of the tension of opposites to await and so that's what he calls the religious, which is like
the tension,
So
here's this crazy thing that is honestly, I almost don't want to. I'm not gonna go as deep into this as I could, because it's too fresh and it's too personal. But there's this little phrase that Ian McGilchrist said sometime recently. I don't know if it was in some lecture or. I told you I did have a conversation with him, which is such a. I mean, that really helped me to get in touch with that sort of undeserving. But he said, I forget when he said it, but he talked about this this story, legend. Maybe he said maybe it's in the Cabal, whatever. Well, I can't even remember the story exactly, but basically the conclusion is that it's both either or and both and, which is such a word salad. But within the context of what we've been talking about so far, it makes total sense. It really is both either or and both and. It's both the father's judgmental perspective and the mother's inclusionary perspective at the same time. And I went on this sort of meditational journey where that kind of becomes fractal, because I mean, if it really is both either or and both and, then it's both. Okay, let me read this. This is going to be funny to you. If I could find it. 1 second. Okay. I wrote in my notes after this conversation, just kind of comically, but I sort of do both believe and not believe this. I don't know, but I wrote, I've come to the conclusion that while it may be true that it's both either or and both and either both and or either or, it's also either both either or and both and, or either both and or either or. Which sounds absolutely stupid and ridiculous. It's like that's even maybe part of where that sort of sense of laughter can come into this philosophy of existence. Really is this wonderful, hilarious, beautiful paradox. I don't know. Somehow thinking about that though brought me to this place where I really felt like I could both love the whole world and hate it at the same time.
I feel you. I completely feel you, and I hear what you were saying about Philosophia earlier. Yeah, it's. No, I mean I share the same intuition. I think so I think it has something to do with wholeness and the mystery of how God reconciles paradoxes, because how can two opposites exist together?
Yeah, I was just can you even explain what does it mean to reconcile opposites?
So Jung talked about this alchemical idea of the coincidentia oppositorum, the Latin word, like the coincidence of the opposites, and how he thought psychologically the way we develop actually is through a growing tension of the opposites. Right. So
both he and Freud made the claim that there's no two things more related than opposites.
Yeah, but like the principle of their transcendence, the reconciliation of them. Reconciliation is like, like just kind of, I guess it means like coming together again, or like a new kind of synthesis, or like the way in which the tension and the strife and the discord created by that tension is somehow resolved. That's kind of what it means to reconcile them. So Jung thought that's kind of how the psyche is operating, is like the tension of opposites grows, and then a new attitude, a new posture, a new psyche, a new way of being emerges that accounts for both of them. And so in Peterson and McGilchrist's first conversation, they talked a lot about this Hegelian notion of the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. There's a kind of Trinity idea implicit in all of this as well. But I guess my point is that I feel like you need a conception of God to hold the space for a paradox to be reconciled. Because otherwise the tension is kind of unbearable. And actually, as I was speaking, I really now think of Jordan Peterson's personal journey and how the tension of the opposites is almost ripping him apart. And God, and it's a loaded word, but like good, some principle is needed to hold, is needed for that paradox to be reconciled, and for a whole perspective to be attained, which can see the depths and the heights, and can see the light and the dark, and all of these.
I feel like we almost. I think we need to stop here. At least I think we need to. I want to keep talking actually, but there's something that feels like, when you get this deep, there you sort of need to stop and it's like we're trying to describe something that's totally beyond words. I don't know. I guess I just sort of have.
I agree with you. Ironically, it's funny. Ironically enough, I want to say to you that I agree with that perspective, but there's also a place for words. It's like that's the and of course we can stop the conversation whenever you want. Obviously, well, I agree, because that is the apophatic, and I don't know what the opposite of it is. But basically. Like the negative and the positive, because it can't be wholly true that it's beyond words, because if that was so, we shouldn't speak about it. I wrote down, even as I was kind of just processing my thoughts about this, I thought I had this very real fear for a moment that I might go insane, because this meditation and this concept felt so true to me. I thought that I had sort of found the truth. And I was like, no, I can't. That's not right. Even though this is such a fun and really exciting, wonderful way of thinking for me, I need to set it down for a second, because I can't fall. I could so easily stumble into this place of hubris where I feel like I've solved the riddle, and it's not possible. Well, this was kind of brings us back to the beginning with this Philosophia idea, because my feeling, what are we up to here, right? we're both taking some time aside to speak, right? And then but then there's a general question about what am I up to in this series of Philosophia, but what am I up to on YouTube, and what are you up to on YouTube, and all of these kind of questions, right? Yeah. And which I actually want to go there if we can in a minute. Well, that's kind of where I'm going, because it's I don't think that this conversation is ultimately about the propositions, about the knowledge, about the amount of knowledge that can be gained by me or you or by any viewer. What I think it is, what I ultimately think is that there is a kind of living, there's a kind of living spirit, like a kind of logos, which kind of comes in this space. There's the when two or three are gathered in my name thing, which I really love. And I fully and wholeheartedly believe in that. And I don't think that's me, and I don't think that's you. I think that's a kind of, the word enthusiasm means to be filled with spirit. I think there's a kind of, there's a way in which what you and I are doing, but even it's not even just spirit. It's like theo, it's to be filled with God, even, right? True. But there's a particular logos to every conversation, which is really fascinating. Yes. So there's one that's obviously emerging here, and it emerged straight from the get-go. And my faith is that every time I speak with someone, that will happen. And when you've been saying about whether we should go into this topic or what it should be about and stuff I think they're important, points. But I think there's a livingness to the spirit of conversation. If I think there might be a condition on it, and I think the condition might be a kind of posture or a kind of humility. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but there's a kind of. Can we switch gears though to talk about where we are kind of actually at, sort of very practically, because I want to hear
very like, I want to kind of come down for a second and hear where you're at and just have that conversation. And I also feel like I need somebody to talk to. I need to share on that.
Yeah.
And maybe, because I mean, you asked me earlier about, you said, I mean, originally even what you've been sort of doing is asking people about their journey and where they're going and stuff with religion. And something I've been really sort of frustrated and struggling with is to try to find a spiritual community. I think you've followed some of the conversations I've been having enough to know that's I've been sort of vocal about that frustration for a little while. Although, I mean, I'm open to any questions you might have about why, but there's a lot of, I feel like really compelled or maybe impelled to want to be part of a church. I love the idea of church, but I can't. Every time I want to try and sit down and go to a church, I get so caught up in all of the things that I'm frustrated at about the culture. And some of it's just very personal kind of baggage. It's just like, that kind of reminds me too much of this stuff that I'm not that comfortable with, or this stuff that I just kind of am dismissive of or think it's kind of wrong, kind of dumb, or a lot of that seems like acting. A lot of that seems like just posturing, like just pretense. And it's so hard. It feels so backwards to look at somebody say they're representing Christ or they're preaching, and it just feels so obvious that they're wrong. But that they're, I'm not sure, like I'm really torn between two perspectives on this, because part of me thinks that's just kind of the way it is, and the way that's even important. That's the way you have to do church. That's the way you have to do community, is be willing to submit, again, to be willing to be misunderstood and even willing to submit yourself to somebody, even though they're wrong on stuff. And it just feels obviously wrong to you. So that might be part of it. But another part of me really, I don't know, it kind of flickers in and out, but I don't know if this version or this culture, this way, this iteration of the church is just going to die. Like, I mean, this has been brought up before in conversation with you, and people have said, yeah, isn't the church dying? And I know that's not the way you feel, because obviously your sense of the church and your experience with the church and your experience with God is not one of feeling a death. It's this, I mean, you could probably describe it, but it feels like it's like, it seems from the outside that this is an exciting time for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just make one comment on while you were speaking, is that in conversations on the Symbolic World Discord, others have raised the same concern that you've just raised about the whole idea that the world is becoming spiritually re-enchanted, and that there is a place for the symbolic and there is a place for Christian vision, for example. But what about corrupt priests? Can I trust authorities? This whole question is very burning in discussions generally. So I'll just like mention that because I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of different people in that Discord, and I think there's almost a collective searching for an answer to that question. But you said it's a very exciting time for me. Like I guess like the way I can say it is like my whole so I spoke with Cassidy the other day on my YouTube channel, and she talked about how church for her had become, I can't remember the exact words she used, but it was kind of, I think something like lukewarm, or like not, it just kind of it had lost something at some point in her life. And I think this is basically generally my concern, and is the concern of my PhD thesis and all of that. But like, it is possible to go to church and the spirit to not be there. right? No, like I think so. Like, I don't know. I don't have a Christian background. I'm coming from I'm coming from a, like, what I mean is, like, or let's not go church. Okay, we can go church, but let's go general. There can be a living spirit within a system, or the system can become dead and dogmatic. It can become dry, I guess is the word that's often used about some forms of church, like dry, okay? Yeah. Dry, and Custody used the word lukewarm, I think. So dry, lukewarm, okay? And so when I say the spirit, that's kind of what I have a specific meaning. I'm not trying, I don't want to say something heretical there. Like, I want to, like, but I want to say, like, I don't know if it's spirit's the right word. It might be soul. Soul might be the word. But this is generally what concerns me, is like, there's this subtle way in which that is what our culture is basically lost, in my opinion. And like, that many people are in many ways trying to recover or understand, okay, is basically the idea of soul. Like, our culture's lost its soul. And what I mean by that word soul is something like a living resonance and imaginative engagement with and participation in of my heart and my passion with this thing I'm in, okay? And there's something, maybe it's something like the Holy Spirit in the Trinity, but we don't need to get bogged down in theological stuff, but I think it's something like that, okay? And so what I'm trying to say is, like, it's possible for a church to lose the Holy Spirit, and I don't know, that's probably heretical as well, so I should probably stop saying stuff like that. But like, what I'm trying to say is, like, no, because like what I'm observing, like, is just a truth. Like, I'm observing a truth about, and it's not me, it's like many people have been observing it, but it's like people are becoming disenchanted by Christianity and by church in various walks of life in various ways, okay? Like, and I've gone through my own period of my own disenchantment, and I guess what my story really is like, I went through a very deep disenchantment and was studying philosophy at the time and reading existentialism at the time, and kind of like got very intellectually interested in what is this disenchantment and what is enchantment, and like, what is that? Because without that, it's like the whole faith loses meaning. Like, it's about meaning, it's about soul, it's about the way in which the tradition is given life by me and you and by individual souls. And I think it's possible, not only possible, but patently so in around the world, that there can be a dryness to religious tradition and religious structure. Not to say anything, like, it could be preserving the right sacraments, the right rituals, orienting us in the right way, conducting worship in the right way. And in so many ways, we could say that is a good. And so I don't want to in any way deny the reality of the spiritual reality it's connecting us to. But I do want to say that it's my observation that in my own life and in other people's life, people can become disenchanted. And that's what I hear you saying as well. Like, this whole thing of like, oh, can I really, like, this thing of like, can I really, this thing of like, can I enter into this, right? Is, for me, basically it's a question of imagination. It's a question of the way in which the life of our inward life, the life of our soul, participates in the whole tradition. And that's a very existential, psychological, individualistic way of looking at it.
I need you to walk with me through here and try to plug that into some of the more specific cases, because I mean, the experience of when I can think about this, the idea of church again, even a sort of very Platonic, the ideal of church, it's like this beautiful thing, but I don't like going to church. I have to, it's like such an exercise of trying to see past, again, maybe just be the whole part of the experience is just that it's sort of like doing spiritual push-ups where you're sitting there and you're seeing so much brokenness and accepting the God in that brokenness it's broken sort of from your perspective, from my perspective. It's like, it seems like this is so dumb, this is so stupid, and you're forced into a position where you either get up and leave, or you can just sit there and mockingly judge everything, or you can humbly accept that maybe God is present in that sort of obvious foolishness.
So my challenge to you would be to say that there's a failure of imagination in that. To say it's so stupid, this is so stupid or whatever. And not only that, but like there's a bigger thing of like what church and what tradition, and there's all whole questions around that, obviously. But like even at the micro and the macro, in my opinion, it is ultimately a question of imagination. Like, and I mean by that all of the stuff we talk about in terms of symbolism, meaning, and patterns, and all of these things. But like I don't know how it's a tough one, because I don't know how deeply I can speak into your particular relationship to church, because we all have very idiosyncratic stories there. But what I do want to say is that I like, part of my thesis, part of what I'm focusing on is the question of imagination in
well, somewhat disingenuous though to like imagine something being so far away from what it really seems to be to you, like trying to imaginally bring to life this spirit of church when the church that I'm actually experiencing is so lifeless, such a husk of itself. Mm-hmm. It may just be a question of being able to convince myself to believe it and then bring about it as truth. But I guess maybe there's also sort of a loneliness in that too. This is just like, it's like to view the thing for more than it is. I feel like I'm like seeing something and having a different experience than everybody else there too, maybe.
Yeah, but that's always the case. That's always the case. Like every human experience is different from the way others experience it. But like, look, I mean, there may be legitimate like. Firstly, it depends what church you're going to and what tradition and stuff, because I think there's legitimate points to be raised about the general disenchantment of certain Christian religious traditions. Like, I think I don't know enough about it, but I think it's fair to say that the Protestant Reformation had something to do with disenchantment, in the sense of it was a rebellion against some of, Catholicism, but all the pomp of Catholicism, and there was a legitimacy to that. But also, like, I went to a Greek Orthodox liturgy the other week, and like the mythic or imaginal, the spirit, the soul of it, kind of say, like, is palpably there in my experience in that tradition. And so firstly, I want to bracket that I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had about the theology of the tradition and the place that theology has for imagination. And I'm not saying imagination is I'm saying it's crucial. I think there's many aspects to life, of course. I'm not trying to like like venerate it above everything. I'm saying that the prophets of the Old Testament, the people who are writing in Scripture, what they're doing when they're conveying words is a kind of poesis, a kind of poetry, and a kind of imaginative. They are embodying an imaginative spirit, and it's very similar with Greek philosophy. Like I'm reading about Parmenides and Empedocles, books on the pre-Socratics, and Peter Kingsley, a scholar, is arguing that they were basically mystics and basically in a kind of poetic religious space, and that poetic religious space is like the birth pangs of Western philosophy, and that the rationalism of Aristotle and like Aquinas and that kind of like logical like reason thing is definitely downstream of that poesis, that imaginative birthing. And so one thing I would want to say is, like, I want to bracket the possibility that some religious traditions afford more place to imagination than others, and preserve a sense of this imaginative spirit. And I think that's absolutely crucial for our spiritual life personally. And so then I think there's a kind of that conversation, but then there's also the conversation of like the more existential one of like basically education and the symbolic world stuff that we're engaged in, and the way in which the spiritual eye is being opened greater and greater to more transcendence, and that is a kind of transformation of the heart kind of thing, and that is the more kind of personal journey. But then, so I think there's a kind of social religious point, and I think there's a personal existential point. And I think that those two are both absolutely crucial in navigating these questions that you're raising.
So I think I agree with you to the extent. I mean, I feel like part of what you're saying is that there is a level of which there's a Philoniciac way of actually judging and saying, you know, this one actually might be lacking in some ways that this tradition isn't. There might actually genuinely be better ways of religiously engaging with the mystery. But I'm not sure what you mean by this.
That was Jordan Peterson's whole narrative, by the way. You know, it was just like, oh, new atheists, wrong perspective, mythos, like mythos. Like that was the whole thing. Like, in my opinion, the whole pattern there is that he's just like, oh, like imagination, mythos, poesis, kind of going back to this deep mystery of what religion is. Okay. And so I think that's why he's important, and I think that's why Pajot's important. I think that's what is connecting the dots here is people yearning to recover something that has been lost in our culture. And I think it has been lost in our culture. I think we have a very rationalistic culture, and the systems of social organization, Max Weber called it rationalization, this rationalization marginalizes and tramples down on imagination and diminishes the importance of imagination. But it is absolutely the soul of culture, religion, philosophy.
But so to have the
argument I want to advance anyway.
So I think that's sort of, I think it's right, and I think but it's right from the either or perspective. And the both and perspective that I'm trying to understand and develop a relationship with says, okay, there's still some hidden gem in these sort of, again, seemingly wrong perspectives, the ones that we cast off. Again, even to run back to what we talked about so far, all these different cast off traditions that don't seem to have the core element are somehow again brought back and redeemed. I even think about the symbolism of just throwing out crap like fertilizer into the ground. It's like I can't process this. My body, I can't do anything with this. But it's not a dejection of that matter and saying this is absolutely worthless. It's saying I don't understand the worth of this, and it's a sort of submission to God to say, yeah, you understand what to do with this. You reintegrate it. It's a humbling, a giving up of saying I can't. Talking about taking a shit being an act of humility. But in a certain way, I really feel like symbolically that's right. You have to dismiss things sometimes, and that doesn't have to be an act of saying that these are utterly valueless. It can be an act of humility, of saying I don't know what to do with this, and I'm not sure if that's the decision I have to make about evangelicalism. Well, it seems that I'm given that decision in this point in my life, but I don't know. I'm just really honestly questioning whether or not I can process it, or if I have to give it to God and say, this to me, this is crap, but I know you can somehow use this. But I feel like that it can be a sign of humility, or it can be a sign of sort of giving up. And I don't know if I sort of have a calling to try harder to process it, because I don't. It seems like it's a very heavy burden, and I don't think most of the people I know that have sort of, Cassidy likes to talk about spiritual reconstruction or deconstruction, but I don't know many people who are really very intentionally trying to at least try to stay on the inside of the evangelical tradition and try to reconstruct from the inside out rather than just throwing it out. Because it feels like that's psychologically necessary for so many people. And I don't know if that's what I need to do. I don't know if sort of I'm just not cut out I guess I appreciate your prayers for some guidance in this, because I don't know what to do. I feel this sort of this freedom to with either side of that coin, to either accept it and willingly try to live as an evangelical and try to work towards transformation in that culture. I could see that being, a right. I could see a good story. I could see something good being accomplished in that, but then I can also feel some grace in even if I choose not to. It doesn't have to be me saying that's just a bunch of bullshit. I can be able to say, no, God can still use that, or ultimately that can be circled around. That can be reintegrated, just not by my power. I'm not able to do it.
Well, I mean, it feels like something kind of akin to like the thing around like like Christianity's relationship to other religions. Like it's a similar question is kind of implicit in that, of like, yeah, and like, but and also this point of like whether it's for you to judge or for God. Like I think that's a very kind of deep shift of perspective, or like imaginative thing, like a really important thing that is actually very tempting for us, I feel, often to judge.
I mean, the one command that God gives, or the first command God gives Adam, right, is to begin to judge things and to name them. And I mean, he's supposed to name all these sort of chaotic creations that are not things yet. God tells him basically to speak, to use the logos to shape the world, and to essentially, I mean, that's some people, I think Peterson and different people associate that idea of the image of God is that in being created in the likeness of God, you're supposed to do what God does and speak to the world and shape it and to call it things and to judge it with your words and to give things names, right?
Yeah. No, I think there's a place for that. I just lost my thought.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. No, yeah, like to judge, like, so like whether someone is a Christian is a good like way to look at this is like, is someone a Christian? Can I say whether you're a Christian? Okay.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like one story would say, yeah, of course I can, because I can tell whether you're going to church or like engaging in rituals. Like, of course I can, because I'm going to look at kind of certain external markers for your Christianity. But then on the other hand, it's like, I can never know your heart, and only God can know your heart. And so personally, my conclusion from the thing of like, are you a Christian, is, properly speaking, that is a limit, that is a limitation of human knowledge. And I should be agnostic about that, because it is not for me to say whether you're a Christian. Only God knows your heart, you know? And that's what I was saying about judgment, is like, because there's a judgment there. If I go, oh, I am going to weigh up whether Garrett's a Christian or not, okay, I'm kind of deigning to kind of judge that matter. But there's a kind of transgression there, I think, because that is a proper limit of human knowledge. I can never know, because there are deep mysteries around participation, the way we act, the way our souls are formed, virtue. There's so much more going on to what it means to be a Christian than things that I might have access to, right? Because it's an inward thing. It's a thing between the soul and God, properly in kind of Christian theology. And so that was kind of my point about judgment. And I think there might be something to that with regards to your situation. There might be, but then it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I think it's I guess I would say, like, there's a kind of seeking after God, and that at some level there needs to be a kind of trust in that process of where God is, kind of thing. Like, you're seeking God, like knowing where he is important, and kind of like only you can know that in the way that only I can know that. Like, there's a very this is why my interest in existentialism comes in, because existentialism, what they're always stressing very intensely is the deep inwardness of these decisions. Kierkegaard has loads of lines about this. He says, marry, I will regret it. Not marry, I'll regret it also.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And that's it. There seems to be something of that to kind of what you're wrestling with here. You know, should I stay? Should I go? I might regret either of them.
If I go, there will be trouble. If I stay, it will be double.
Yeah, and so I think there's a very existential thing here that is very particular to you and very particular to me. Like, I think there's an aspect to what I'm saying is the questions you're asking are existential ones, and to that extent, there's a real limitation in what I can say, but also what any human being can say to speak into that, because it's a very deep searching of the soul. But I guess the best I can do is kind of talk about the phenomenology of the soul, or like what it means to encounter the sacred, and the trust in that you will know when you know what that spiritual home is, and when it's lacking, and that kind of thing, and that kind of trust in your own experience, basically, is again the things I'm concerned with in my thesis, because it's all kind of connected. It's like, do I trust my own existence? Do I trust my own decisions? Do I trust my own like living? I think it's something like the Holy Spirit. I don't want to keep talking these theological terms I don't understand, but like, it's something like that, like the way in which all of this
in my tradition,
alive
threw around the concept of the Holy Spirit like it was. So in my tradition, people threw around the concept of the Holy Spirit like nothing. Everything's the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So we may be extremely blasphemous in this, but at least you're not alone.
Good to know. but like, yeah, like my point is like there's a way in which all of this, like all of this stuff we're talking, symbolism, religion, tradition, has to come alive like a fire. Cassidy, when we were talking, was talking about this image of fire, which I really like. There needs to be a kind of fire dimension to it, and it feels like that's what you're kind of seeking after in these kind of questions. And that's kind of the point I was getting at with imagination, is like it is possible, in my opinion, for certain traditions to lose that fire, and for people to become disenchanted and to lose, to not feel that this is where God is, and there's a kind of trust in one's own experience and judgment that is required to navigate that space. And that sounds somewhat contradictory, because we were just talking about how we shouldn't trust our judgment because God is the one that judges. But such is the nature of this paradoxical conversation we're having. But I think there's some things that God judges and that we're unable to, and that we should endeavor to know the limits of human knowledge and judgment. But like, in my opinion, on existential questions, like the either or things, who else is going to make that decision? And like, the crux, like, which is like the cross, which comes full circle back to the beginning. The crux of it all is that inwardness, is the term Kierkegaard used, the inwardness of this. And I would further comment that I don't think that's a message that we actually hear very often, and it does kind of flirt with the heretical, in the sense of, if I just say, "Oh, trust yourself," then that's kind of that opens kind of new agey. Oh, like, trust yourself, anything. So, but I do think there's something there that we're getting at.
For one more Moby Dick reference, my favorite line that I've quoted this whole time reading the book with the other friends that have been in this class has been at the end. It's the end of this. The author goes on this whole strange and kind of hilarious rant about white things. He talks about just everything that's white, and just kind of it's not even like the symbolism of whiteness. It's just anything that he thinks of that's white. He's like, I wonder about that. I wonder about that. I wonder about that. And the way he caps off this whole crazy chapter is, these things are not without their meaning. He doesn't draw a grand conclusion. It's all to evoke some mystery beyond whatever he said. He says, I don't know what this is about. These things are all not without their meaning.
Yeah, I love that. I think that could be a lovely note to end on, Garrett. It's been it's been a really beautiful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Sam.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so open. And I think, I mean, I guess we should just end it there, because the thing is with these, what I'm learning is that that it's just infinite, and that I could just talk about this forever with everyone. So at some point it needs to be abandoned. No, I really, really appreciate this, Garrett. And in particular, this the whole thing about deserving love you were talking about, I thought that was a real moment of insight for me, and a real moment of clarification for me, because I've never thought about it that way, and it's really right. I think that.
And what you shared, I mean, it, like you said, it could almost be viewed as trite, or as sort of just regular sort of worldly advice, but no, I appreciate you really hearing me out, and what you said really, it landed for me, and I really appreciate the insight and the advice.
Thanks, Garrett. Cool. Well, I'm going to turn the recording off now. And yeah.